Okay, I was asked to do this talk really only in the last week or so, and I've been kind of trying to grapple with what I should talk about and how to put it. In a sense, I'm a bit of an insider or I'm an outsider inside, in that I'm a civil servant. I'm in the department, but everything we do, I don't necessarily always agree, and there may be a few things I'll bring up that may hopefully raise a few discussions. But I thought that having worked on with the expert advisory group on the tentative list for World Heritage, that it is important that we begin to discuss how we're going to bring the World Heritage Programme forward in Ireland. And I think all the discussion that has taken place already today is actually also quite important, because I think there are issues that have been raised that, certainly in my experience, coming at it from the state party, doesn't necessarily always work like that. There's things we would like to do, and there's things that we know we should do, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we always do it. Okay, I mean, the point is pretty obvious. We have 3 World Heritage Sites in the country: Brú na Báine, the Skelligs, and the Giant's Causeway. But the issue that we've had really within the department in the last while is to actually deal with the issues specifically relating to the 2 sites that are our immediate responsibility, Brú na Báine and the Skelligs. And concretely, in relation to the Skelligs, one of the big issues, criticisms of us, was that the fact that the archaeological excavations that had been taking place in conjunction with the conservation works hadn't been published. So it is quite important to mark the fact that the publication of the archaeological work, which really has been the lifetime work of a number of people on the Skelligs, it's on the web. I think they printed about a dozen copies, hard versions, but the rest is on the web. But it's a massive tome, and it's not one that you're going to read in bed, but certainly is a massive tome. The other issue that we've had to deal with in recent times is putting together a new management plan for Brú na Báine, and that has been a slightly complicated experience. And I think maybe in the discussion that's going to take place later on, I think it is worth beginning to think, how do we engage local communities in such processes, but without necessarily making assumptions about local communities. I'll come back to that point later on. Just in relation to the tentative list, the previous list we had was quite an old tentative list. I think it was first put together when Ireland first ratified the World Heritage Convention, and had been around for a very, very long time, and was in a sense completely out of date, but also didn't reflect the changes that exist today in relation to World Heritage and how we deal with sites. It was all very much focused on individual monuments, like the Rock of Cashel as the Rock of Cashel, and I'll show you the tentative list in a few minutes, but it was particularly focused on individual sites. But I wasn't actually on the expert advisory group officially, but I did attend all the meetings, so I'm not quite sure what that makes me, but I did go to all the meetings and wrote up some of the documents. But I think the procedure that we went through in relation to to the tentative list review was actually quite interesting. Now, in fairness, it was a top-down procedure, but the state advertised the fact that it was doing a review of the tentative list, and invited people to send in submissions. We also went around the country talking to various local authorities, local groups, and basically anyone who would listen to us, to be honest, talking about World Heritage and what being on the tentative list meant. And there were quite a significant number of submissions, and what I think is actually the most interesting thing about the submissions was how the submissions interlocked. There were some which, to be honest, just weren't going nowhere. I mean, there was a submission for a particular tower house. There's X thousand tower houses in the country, so one particular tower house is obviously not World Heritage. But what I thought was interesting, where there were quite a number of submissions which in the end didn't end up on the final tentative list, but I do think are certainly worth exploring, and I maybe betray my own interest. I thought it was a pity that they didn't go onto the World Heritage, onto the tentative list, but I think that people shouldn't despair and that they could proceed. These were primarily 19th century sites. There's obviously a very elaborate system of fortifications that were established in the late 18th century, early 19th century, at the time of the Napoleonic Wars. So there was a submission from Cork City for the Cork City's fortifications. There was a submission from somebody else for a bit of the Shannon. There was a submission from somebody else for another bit, but nobody saw, well, actually all of this was defending one island, they weren't all individual pieces. So although, I would be very keen to explore that one further, but it's one that didn't go forward. And then after that, many of the submissions we got were really the standard ones that you might expect that there would be. And each submission was reviewed by the expert advisory group, which was made up of people from a whole range of expertise. Obviously there was the civil servants from the department, but there were a number of international people, Donald Hankey from ICMOS in the UK, and Yuka Leto, who probably most of you would know. But then there was archaeologists, there were architectural historians. We even had somebody who was what you call people who look after anthropologists. Yes, we had an anthropologist, and which was kind of quite like the anthropologist wasn't on the group initially, and it was Donald Hankey who said, well, this is actually what we're talking about is societies. We're not just talking about monuments. And having an anthropologist gave the group a wider understanding of what we were looking at and trying to deal with. So what is the tentative list? This is the tentative list, and as I said earlier, I think the big difference between this tentative list and the previous tentative list was that the previous tentative list was very individual monument focused. And this time round, I think the only one that wasn't specifically individual monument focused, which has been carried on here, is the Western Stone Forts. The Western Stone Forts were on the list, the last tentative list, and the Burren was also on the last list, but the Burren is kind of quite a different type of complex. But in terms of built complexes, almost all the other sites are a group or a theme as opposed to an individual site. Just maybe worth saying in relation to the tentative list, in putting this talk together, I was looking for a photograph, so I googled it, and I hit on one site which was talking about its site being on the World Heritage List. And I felt like sending them an email. I said, no, it's not on the World Heritage List, it's on the tentative list. And I think it is important to understand that the tentative list is not the World Heritage List. And it is quite possible that some or none of these proposals will actually finally go forward. In the immediate future, I suspect probably none are going to go forward. I think internally within the department, we are going to have to get our act together in relation to Brú na Báine and the Skelligs, and when we have our act together there, I think we have a bit more chance of progressing with the tentative list. But it is quite difficult as to think how we go forward. I'd throw this one up. Probably you recognise Clonmacnoise, because Clonmacnoise was on the last tentative list, and we had a pretty riotous, complicated public consultation in relation to the nomination, or the potential nomination, of Clonmacnoise on the World Heritage List, and it never actually proceeded in the end. And I think this actually does raise a number of concrete questions. There's been a lot of discussion about community, and so I asked the question, what do we mean by community? I live in the North Inner City. Obviously that's a community, but within that community there are people campaigning to keep another element of our community out of that community. So, like, I'm always a little bit careful. We just very blithely talk about the community, and I think actually there are probably multiple communities. The communities of interest, there's communities of residence, etc. And I mean, I was at one of the public consultation meetings in Brú na Báine. We just got hell. We just got hell. Now, I can understand why we got hell, but I don't think the discussion actually focused on the benefits for the community. I think that the discussion focused on a problem that certainly does exist for some people in the area, but it's the same people who had this problem 20 years ago. I mean, I was at another public consultation 20 years ago, and it was exactly the same people. And I haven't been in Brú na Báine for a long time, and I was kind of, right, okay, I've been here before. So I think there are issues about defining community, and then if we're talking about public consultation, why are we doing public consultation? Now, I absolutely in favour of public consultation. I'm also in favour of people having a say, not just public consultation because to let them spout off. I think people should have a say, but I don't think ultimately they should have a final say. I'll come to that in a second. The other one is just even thinking in terms of public consultation, how do we deal with the expectations that people have arising out of publication, out of consultation? And the one that really strikes me at the moment in the context of a country where we're kind of going through the agonies. I mean, I get emails in the inventory every single day of people giving bad, spouting on bad language, just really with frustration about everything. And I think that a lot of the public consultations that we've been involved in as the state body, now we don't do it very well, but a lot of public consultations have been difficult because other issues that have nothing to do with the question involved arose. And I just throw this one in because, again, we talk about community, but we are talking about World Heritage. And World Heritage, the community is more than just the people who live in a particular area or a particular town or a particular townland. Okay, I just throw this one in to make the point that certainly within the department, the fact that heritage tourism has a big financial aspect to it is probably the one thing that keeps our noses above water. Was there not this connection, I suspect we would be drowning. However, looking at what the Minister was saying earlier this morning, sometimes there's good news and sometimes there's bad news. And I think there is a little bit of good news at the moment. And if nothing else is taken away from this conference, I think the potential for leader funding for heritage projects is a particularly important initiative. The agreement, there's seemingly a substantial sum of money. The leader haven't been able to spend the money that they have, and there's a substantial sum of money available for projects. And what we as the department, with the Department of Environment, are trying to do is to make sure that if leader funding is spent on projects, that these projects are properly managed, properly dealt with, etc. And I think the potential of using this funding as part of a progressing of a World Heritage Site inscription is particularly important. The leader funding, obviously, like all these things, would be dependent on having the proper expertise involved in the project and that everything is done correctly, and it almost goes without saying. And the kinds of projects that could avail of leader projects, like my talk is primarily in relation to World Heritage Sites, but I think there's a huge amount of projects that could benefit. The conservation officers were complaining that they weren't mentioned, so to mention the conservation officers, like when I looked through this, these 4 slides that I have, I only saw in the last 2 days, and it just seems to me that there's a huge potential that people begin to think creatively about how leader funding could be used. Up to now, I believe leader funding wasn't available to local authorities, and again, I shouldn't trump the minister, but I believe they will be, or hope to be, making an announcement that would allow leader funding even to be availed of by local authorities. And it can also be used for research purposes, and it just gives you an idea of the range of research possibilities. The final thing, and here I just would kind of reiterate absolutely the point that Neil made, Neil Silberman, about World Heritage. And I'm trying to, the World Heritage inscription is a footnote, not the headline. And I'm just going to look at 2 projects that I've gone to see on my holidays, and I just thought, yeah, okay, this is really thinking through the issues. And I always have the belief that a heritage project, forget about nomination or inscription or anything like this, if a project is well done and well managed, it will have a benefit way beyond what the original intention is. And the process of going through, thinking through a nomination, even if a nomination doesn't finally happen, is really, really important. And a place or a city or a town, what's that mean, 3 minutes? You can't read his watch. The process is particularly is important. The example I have here is Bordeaux, and literally there was something between a 10 or 15 year project, to clean the buildings, to refurbish buildings, to bring in a light rail system that completely transformed the city. I remember Bordeaux 25 years ago, and to be honest, it was a kip. Today, you just would not say that. And I think, it's probably not heritage, but I think the most beautiful intervention they've made in the town is this, I don't even know what you call it, it's not a fountain, but it's this stone, there's a long walkway along the river, between the river and the town, but it turns into sort of a big, not even a pond, because it's only a fraction deep, but it turns into mist, it turns into a pond, and the kids play in it and swim in it, and it just is one of these kind of interventions which is just so simple, but completely changes the way people live and work around this area, and obviously kids enjoying the heat or taking a cool off. The other one I think that's particularly interesting is the Loire, and the Loire originally was nominated for the Chateau de Chambord, and at some stage they changed it so that it becomes the Loire and its cultural landscape. But it's not just the heritage aspect. There's this incredible project that they've developed which links the whole of the Loire as a cycle route, and it's not something you would say, it's not a heritage project, but at the same time it's a benefit to the area. And the kind of benefits you get, there's a train system that literally runs all the way along. And what's particularly interesting about the train system is that you can bring your bike on it as a card-carrying cyclist. But the other interesting thing, if you look at the way the threshold of the train is made, it also suits wheelchairs. You know, in other words, there's a whole series of things that have arisen out of the fact that it's a World Heritage Site, or a whole series of things that have gone into making it a World Heritage Site that's not purely focused on heritage. It's all about making the place more better place to live in. And again, just the way they highlight each little township along the river is this sort of simple wind vane type structure. So just, you know, the point being that the process of going through a World Heritage nomination, thinking through the World Heritage nomination, even if in the end it doesn't go forward, and I'm particularly interested in the context of Dublin, even if Dublin doesn't go forward, if the powers that be really went through the process, that there would be a huge spin-off benefit for the place. And I'll leave it at that.